They didn't start as legends, they started as wreckage. Scenes didn't line up, dialogue went nowhere. Some had no endings, some had too many. Directors quit, studios panicked. What was captured on set wasn't art, it was noise. But deep in the silent vaults of post-production, someone kept watching for structure, for rhythm, for a heartbeat under the chaos. It wasn't a rewrite, it wasn't a reshoot. It was something quieter and far more powerful. The edit. In some films, entire plots were reassembled like puzzles dumped on the floor. In others, the most iconic moments, the lines, the beats, the action didn't even exist until after the cameras stopped rolling. Editors stitched, slashed, and salvaged. What came out on screen wasn't what was filmed, it was what survived. These aren't stories about happy productions. They're about near-death experiences, cinematic code blues that found a pulse in the last possible room. The action you remember, the tension that made you hold your breath, the moment that made the movie, it was born in the edit bay. These are 15 Hollywood action movies that were saved in the editing room. Fact Hekjane, Taken 2008. It wasn't designed to be iconic. In fact, Taken almost wasn't released at all. The initial assembly cut painted a grim picture, scenes dragged, the tension was flat, and Liam Neeson's performance, measured and quiet, was lost in a script that failed to match its own ambitions. The central action sequences lacked rhythm, and the infamous phone scene, it barely landed. Producers braced for failure, but inside the editing room, a different kind of thriller was being carved out. The editors compressed long, meandering scenes into tight bursts of energy. They reshuffled narrative beats to build a more urgent momentum. They sliced the action into kinetic pieces, giving Neeson's stoicism an undercurrent of quiet rage. The biggest decision? Pulling that now famous monologue out of obscurity, framing it as the film's emotional ignition point. That one line, once buried, became a cultural weapon. The movie didn't change. The cut changed how we felt it, and a soft-spoken Irish actor was suddenly the scariest man in Europe. Fact #2, Mad Max. Fury Road, 2015. Some movies are built in the storyboard. This one was forged in madness. Fury Road began without a traditional script, shot across deserts with sandstorms in place of schedules and sequences filmed with no linear logic. Actors didn't know what scene came next. Crew members couldn't tell where it was going. And the footage? A roaring storm of chaos. But chaos has rhythm if you know where to cut. Margaret Sixel, editor and wife of director George Miller, took on the near-impossible task of threading coherence through the maelstrom. She didn't tame the energy, she harnessed it. Each shot was treated like a musical note. Some lingered, some snapped. The entire film pulsed like a war drum. Over 2,700 cuts created the illusion of flow. Not linear, but emotional. Not logic, but propulsion. In the edit, Fury Road transformed from an unwatchable explosion of visuals into a kinetic masterpiece. The film didn't just win award, it rewrote the rulebook on how action could feel. Fact #3, The Bourne Identity, 2002. This franchise began with a panic attack. The Bourne Identity was meant to be slick and smart. What came out of production was clunky, incomplete, and tone-deaf. The ending didn't exist. The pacing felt uneven. Jason Bourne, supposed to be a human weapon, just wandered the screen. But when post-production took over, the film was stripped down to its psychological core. Editors deleted entire subplots, moved scenes like chess pieces, and leaned into Bourne's isolation rather than his training. Silence became tension. Glimpses became clues. After 9/11, the studio demanded a new sensibility, more grounded, more human. The edit delivered. Choreography was cut tighter, dialogue was minimized, and a thriller was reborn not in spectacle, but in restraint. The final result felt intentional, but behind the curtain, it was survival. Fact #4. Edge of Tomorrow, 2014. Time loops can kill a story, especially when the audience starts feeling stuck too. When Edge of Tomorrow finished shooting, it was clever on paper but messy on screen. The logic twisted in on itself. The tone kept shifting. And the ending? It felt like the writers hit reset one time too many. The editors realized they weren't cutting a movie about war, they were cutting a movie about momentum. They trimmed repeated deaths until they felt like evolution. They built urgency with each pass, turning each reset into revelation. They reordered key plot points to create emotional growth between bursts of violence, and perhaps the boldest stroke, starting not with origin, but with chaos. That edit threw the viewer directly into battle, forcing them to catch up, just like the protagonist. By the time it looped for the last time, the audience wasn't confused, they were hooked. Fact #5, Rogue One. A Star Wars Story, 2016. Sometimes a war film needs a quiet heart, and this one almost lost it. Rogue One had ambition, but in its early form, it had no soul. Test audiences felt disconnected, characters drifted. The final act, the supposed emotional crescendo, barely made a sound. Disney brought in editor Jabez Olson and writer-director Tony Gilroy to reconstruct the film from the inside out. They didn't just add scenes, they shifted the center of gravity. Jyn Erso went from background rebel to emotional core. Her arc was reordered, her decisions reframed. The edit gave her a cause worth dying for. Scarif's battle was sculpted, shot by shot. The Vader Hallway Massacre? An 11th hour edition that turned a forgettable finale into franchise lore. This wasn't editing for polish, it was editing for meaning. Faktraute 6. Die hat 1988. It was supposed to be just another action flick, the kind you forget by the time the credits roll. But the early cuts of Die Hard were uneven, unsure of themselves. Was it a thriller, a comedy, a survival story? Bruce Willis felt like the wrong guy. Alan Rickman too theatrical. The pacing sagged, scenes dragged, and the tower just felt tall, not terrifying. In the editing suite, everything shifted. The team reshaped McClane's arc less macho, more human. They dialed into the silences, the hesitation before a kill, the exhale after a gunshot. Rickman's scenes were reordered to make him more methodical, more menacing. The action became sharper not by adding chaos, but by organizing it. The cuts gave space to every beat, letting the tension breathe before it exploded. When the final version hit screens, it didn't just work. It became a blueprint. Fact número 7. Suicide Squad, 2016. When a trailer edits better than the film, the studio sometimes makes a radical choice. Suicide Squad began as something darker, grittier, but the first cut was flat, dragging, and wildly inconsistent. Warner Brothers panicked. Instead of calling a filmmaker, they called a trailer company. Trailer Park, the team behind the movie's flashy preview, was hired to cut a new version of the film. What they delivered was a montage-heavy, music-driven chaos engine. Dialogue was chopped, scenes rearranged, and style took the wheel. It didn't make more sense, but it moved faster, looked cooler, and sounded louder. The edit wasn't about saving the story. It was about salvaging attention span. And strangely, it worked. Not because it fixed the movie, but because it distracted you from noticing it was broken. Fact Gomalt. Salt 2010. Sometimes, the edit has to rewrite the character. Salt was born as a vehicle for Tom Cruise. When Angelina Jolie stepped in, the script wasn't adjusted nearly enough. The result? A thriller with mismatched motivations and a hero that didn't quite fit the mold. Editors saw a different opportunity. They didn't rewrite Evelyn Salt, they revealed her. By trimming exposition and leaning into Jolie's stillness, they built tension around not knowing who she really was. They shifted twists forward, tightened the pacing, and restructured the climax to make ambiguity feel deliberate. The final touch. An alternate ending discarded. Salt doesn't get caught. She disappears. The film left questions unanswered, but for the first time, it felt like that was the point. Fact número 9. Iron Man 2008. Improvisation is risky, especially when it's the foundation of your entire movie. Iron Man began without a complete script. Dialogue was made up on the spot. Scenes were discovered, not designed. It gave the film a natural charm, but it also left the story structure hanging by threads. In the editing room, those threads were woven into something stronger. Editors reorganized scenes to emphasize Tony Stark's transformation. Flashbacks were inserted with precision, and moments of silence, Pepper holding the arc reactor, Tony staring down his own legacy, were given room to echo. They didn't just cut for speed, they cut for evolution. The origin of the Marvel Cinematic Universe wasn't forged in fire. It was assembled in pieces, frame by frame. Fact Hasson 0. World War Z, 2013. You can't edit your way out of a bad ending, unless you throw the whole ending away. World War Z was headed for a crash. The final act, an explosive Moscow uprising with Brad Pitt leading a militia, was expensive, incoherent, and emotionally dead. No tension, no clarity, no point. Rather than trying to fix it, the filmmakers did something rare. They started over. The massive battle finale was scrapped. In its place, a quiet sequence inside a WHO facility was written and built around tension, not spectacle. The editors used silence as a weapon, paranoia as pacing. The new third act barely had zombies, but it had fear. By shrinking the scale, they magnified the suspense, and a blockbuster saved itself by whispering instead of screaming. Fact Hasson 0. Mission Impossible. Fallout 2018. Too much action can be a problem, especially when none of it leaves a mark. The early cut of Fallout was loaded with spectacle fights, chases, stunts, but it played like a highlight reel. Audiences admired it, but didn't feel it. Something was missing between the explosions. Editor Eddie Hamilton slowed things down. He gave breath to the moments between punches. He let the silence before a leap last just long enough to make your chest tighten. He stretched emotional threads, Ethan and Ilsa, loyalty and trust across the chaos. The action didn't need more firepower. It needed gravity. That shift turned Fallout from just another sequel into the most grounded human entry in the franchise. Fact Hasson 2, 3002-006. There's a reason the battles in 300 feel like a dream. They kind of were. Most of 300 was shot on green screens. No real locations, no depth, no atmosphere. Actors shouted into empty space, swinging swords at nothing. The raw footage looked like a college cosplay project, but the editors didn't run from the artificiality, they embraced it. Every frame was stylized. Motion was warped. Blood flew like paint on canvas. The now iconic speed ramp technique, slow, fast, slow, was refined until it felt mythic. The edit didn't aim for realism, it aimed for legend. And somehow, from green voids and choreographed screams, they crafted a battle that still echoes. Fact Hasson 3, Speed 1994. A movie about a bus shouldn't feel this fast. When Speed was first screened, its high-concept hook wasn't enough. The scenes on the bus, meant to be heart-pounding, felt repetitive. The tension stalled. Audiences disengaged. The problem wasn't the story, it was the tempo. The editors stripped it down like a ticking time bomb. They sliced seconds from every glance, trimmed transitions, and rearranged moments to create forward momentum. They layered engine sounds like drum beats, cut camera angles for chaos, and built suspense through compression. Even moments of stillness felt urgent. The jump scene, pure illusion stitched together through angles and edits that made the impossible seem inevitable. Speed didn't just move, it pulsed. Fact 14. Tango, Cash 1989. When a film loses its director mid-shoot, you don't finish it, you rescue it. Tango and Cash was a cocktail of clashing egos, tonal confusion, and scenes that didn't match. Stallone wanted straight action. Russell leaned towards satire. The result? Chaos. The original cut made no narrative sense, so the studio handed the footage to multiple editors and crossed their fingers. The edit leaned into absurdity. Scenes were shortened, jokes repositioned, and action made so over the top it felt intentional. The prison break was stitched together from fragments, but the rhythm made it feel seamless. It wasn't polished, it was reckless on purpose, and somehow, that was enough to make it unforgettable. Fact Hasson 5. The Matrix 1999. The philosophy almost drowned the action. The Wachowskis shot a film packed with ideas, free will, control, simulated reality, but their first assembly cut moved like molasses talk, heavy, dense, and disorienting. The action existed, but the story felt buried under its own weight. Editor Zack Steinberg performed digital alchemy. He shifted monologues, reordered flashbacks, and cross-cut between training, questioning, and revelation to generate a rising pulse. He treated fight scenes like punctuation placed strategically to reset the rhythm and refocus the audience. And bullet time, it wasn't just a camera trick. It was an editorial signature. The Matrix didn't win because it was smart. It won because it moved like an idea breaking free. Bonus fact, Justice League 2017. Sometimes editing doesn't save the film. Sometimes it buries it. When Zack Snyder stepped away from Justice League, the footage he left behind was raw, unfinished, but driven by a singular tone. Warner Brothers didn't want that tone, so they replaced the director, and with him, the vision. What followed wasn't a re-edit, it was a replacement. Scenes were reshot, color grading was brightened, jokes were added, whole character arcs vanished, and in the cutting room, two separate films were welded into one badly. The pacing broke, the emotional threads snapped. The final version felt disjointed, like it had been made by committee, because it had. And then, years later, the Snyder Cut arrived. 4 hours, cohesive, grand, imperfect, but whole. It didn't just restore a director's vision, it exposed what happens when editing stops being an art and becomes a compromise. You've seen the finished product, now you know the surgery behind it. Which of these films surprised you the most? And which one do you think still carries the scars of its original cut? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell us which film we should dissect next. Behind the Velvet Curtain.